How's it going, everybody? Today I'm just going to give some tips how any single person can find mule deer antlers, elk antlers, and those type of things. Today we're going to be talking about onyx and how to use it to find those shed antlers. Onyx is one of the best ways to be able to find those antlers because you can see where thermal cover is, where the winter ranges are, and many other things. So we're going to help you learn topography on how to make shed hunting a lot easier and how to find more sheds. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll hop right into it. The number one thing when people ask me how I find so many sheds is where do you look? Where do you go? And for whitetails, that's much different. The biggest thing you want to look for in any state is thermal cover, whether that's CRP grass or grounds and fields where they bed and where they eat, or basically up in the hills in pine trees and such like that. But what you need to understand is the East Coast and the West Coast are very different landscapes. One has a lot of hemlocks and thicker trees and forests. The other ones have sagebrush and are very open canopies. And Idaho, in particular, where we're going to be talking about, is aspens as well as juniper trees and sagebrush up on the hillsides to look for these mule deer sheds. So when trying to find where winter ranges are, I had to start from scratch because I'm not originally from Idaho. So the out of the 126 sheds that I found, probably I'd say 60 or somewhere on public land. And the ways that I found that was simply just going to this website, because nobody would help me. Nobody would give me information, which I understand because those spots have been passed down through generations and people are very keep those very near and dear close to them. So if you look down here, you'll see this is the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. So basically all these things where there's concentrated thermal, that is where all the deer in Idaho are in their winter ranges. And you can switch this to have it be summer range, winter range, wherever it is. So a lot of these deer, some of them will come all the way from Wyoming, come over the border. Some of them will come from Montana down, etc. So all these different places are going to be concentrations of where there's deer. Right here is what we're going to be talking about because this is the closest place to me. Sorry, right here is because I'm right here. So in this area, there's different ranges of hills and mountains, and I'm not going to give necessarily specifics, but this is a spot I don't mind sharing because I want you guys to be successful too. Um, so now we're going to go to Onyx, and one of the best ways to find thermal cover, this goes for whitetail as much as it does for um, mule deer, is I'll go right here into the layers section. There will be an orange thing that says layers, and you need either a free trial or you need an account for this. But you can just use fake emails and basically do like 7-day free trials for one particular state if you need to. So right here, that's off right now, and I'll turn it on. And what that will do is it'll create different colors of like purple where there's thermal cover. So you'll see right here, all this is thermal cover anywhere where there's thick. So that means there's trees there and other things that are going to keep those deer warm in the winter months. Because a year like this, they're all going to be extremely low compared to other years because of that. So I know where some elk are going to be this year just based off of where the snow line's going to be and where they're going to be pushed down to. But then you have places like Logan, Utah, where oftentimes they'll just be living in the suburbs. Happens a lot in Nevada, so you just have to adapt. So that's a great option is to look at that. And now we'll get into some of the topography of how to understand the lay of the land. So if you hit this button right here and you hit hybrid, so there's a satellite view, topography view. Topography just doesn't show any, it just shows the lines. It does not show the actual landscape of what it looks like on Google Maps. Google Maps is also a good way, but it doesn't show you topography. So this one right here, this is a butte right here. This is a different mountain range. So you can see all these different access points of how people can drive in here. A lot of these places don't take it for its word. You want to zoom in and check if it's a real road or if it's a real trail, because a lot of times they'll cut off at the base of the mountain and there will be rules where it's a walk-in only. But it doesn't say that necessarily on a sign. There will just be like a log there. So you want to make sure you're following the rules, whether you're shed hunting or hunting. So coming up this, you see all these different fingers coming up into the mountain range. And then you see these right here. This is a really thick patch. But the reason why this isn't going to be that good of a spot is because it's a north-facing slope, usually. You want to be looking for those south-facing slopes, so anything that gets that sunlight, because that's where the deer are going to want to go. So we're going to move up a little bit where there's a bigger south-facing slope. And all these places will hold deer if you go at the right time of the year and make sure there is deer there with your diligent scouting. So let's say I want to drive up into this spot. We're just going to find a saddle. Alrighty, right here. So this is a perfect example of a good spot. So this has a bunch of different fingers coming down, and there's a saddle right here. So what a saddle is when two topography lines that are like circles like this, they come together and then they have a spot in between where there's no lines. Disregard this unit line. That's just to help understand what hunting unit it is. And right here, there's a gap. And basically that funnels deer movement. Everything that deer do is basically based off of topography. So that's something good to understand. And there's a bunch of thermal cover and then all these different streams come down. When they're dotted lines, that means that there's sometimes water there within the year, but not always. If it's a direct solid blue line, that means there's water in a river flowing there yearly, all year long. So, that being said, you also want to keep track of the altitude. It depends on what area you're in, because a lot of times there will be deer in like sage flats or like in New Mexico and like the red dirt and stuff like that, where they might not be at a high altitude. Usually, what I've found is 7,500 to about 8,500 is where those deer will be. But obviously, it varies year to year. But I also know people that have found sheds at 10,000 feet. So it honestly depends. Um, so we see that there's a saddle right here. There's a saddle right here. So what I would do is I would just press right here, and then I'd add a waypoint. And there's going to be an option that's going to say pinch point. And basically what that's going to tell me, and I color code mine a certain way. If I'm scouting, I'll do yellow to mean like check this spot. But if I know something is good, I'll put it like a really turquoise blue or I'll put it a red. And that way I know what I've actually been to so I can check. Okay, so I just hit pinch point, and that way there's no button for a saddle because not everyone understands what a saddle is. So I put that right there. And then now I can go from here and I'll just put different pins if I want, like right here. So I would walk this ridge where there's different saddles, or I would climb up different ravines. That's how I find a lot of moose paddles, is just following those ravines or valleys that go up. And right here is a perfect example of a good area. There's multiple different things coming in, different fingers, and then there's trees and foliage. Another thing to look for is benches. So benches are basically when there's a hill, but then there's basically a flat line across. And that's when you can find a lot of deer that are cutting across the side hills. And those are usually good spots. So right here, these would be good spots. This face looks pretty open, like all the sun would hit it, as well as this one, and they're all south-facing slopes. Like I said, that's just a generalization, but 90% of my sheds come on south-facing slopes, and I'm sure other people would agree. These ridges are also important. Any of these ridges, I found about 8 sheds on one, or no, it was 6 sheds on one ridge in about 5 minutes last year, on a ridge like this. But I walked up one of these hills and along the ridges. It was just covered in antlers because there was tons of deer. But you also need to understand, like zooming in, that some of them are like rock faces. Elk, you'll find anywhere basically wherever they're living. But mule deer, I tend not to find them on like the craziest rock cliffs. Like that's just not where I find them. Usually it's pretty predictable where they're at. Alrighty. So one of these, we came up this road and we hiked up this canyon. And there was some elk droppings, but they were kind of old. But we made our way up this ridge and we saw about 40 mule deer. We didn't find any sheds because I think it had been pretty picked through at that point. But it was definitely a good wintering area because they were just coming down at night and then going back up right here, not changing much of an altitude, just sitting and sunbathing, as well as feeding. And then we saw a big spike bull up here and some other elk. So those are just things to keep in mind. We got saddles and those. And then I'm going to open this up so you get another visualization. This is a great thing, deer association. This is for whitetails, but mule deer will also keep these in mind. So these are other examples of different saddles coming together. Then we'll come down to these crow feet or travel hubs. So these waves basically are just like the side ridges, looking for these ways where they could come in from multiple different areas. For whitetails, there's going to be scrapes and other things. For mule deer in big country, it's obviously quite different. This is also a good feature, is you can like pull down with the bar and be able to see it at like this level for onyx. So for these, there's like a cliff here, obviously. A lot of times whitetail will be on the edges of cliffs next to like trees or something. So that way they don't need to worry about prey sneaking up from the back. So oftentimes you'll find sheds in their beds in places like that where they have the wind in their face and then they don't need to worry about visually anything coming behind them because they can see anywhere over here. Or they can turn around and see down here if there's something coming up. Then we have another example right here is river bends. So this again doesn't apply much to mule deer, but it's something to understand because if you're in like Colorado or maybe there's mule deer down by river bottoms, they will still use topography like this. So places where there's a river bend and there's topography that leads up to a point right on a curve of a river, oftentimes in the thickest area of that point, there will be a deer. And you'll jump them and you'll see their beds in the snow occasionally. And those are some great things to learn. There's a lot of different resources. There's collars that they put on the wildlife and mule deer, and that way you can see how far they move. I think the longest recorded mule deer migration was 221 miles or something crazy like that. But it's not uncommon. I've had some of the herds that I follow that I've seen GPS collars on, I've contacted the Fish and Game and asked them this location, where do they normally come from? And a lot of the mule deer were coming from Jackson, Wyoming, or even farther, coming to Idaho, which is pretty remarkable. It's about 50 miles or 43 miles that they were traveling. So those are just some simple tips to try to find more mule deer. There's more layers that you can use for whitetails. But yeah, these are some great tips to be able to find more sheds. I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope no one kills me if this is one of their shed hunting spots. But these are some great ways that you can get out there, find more sheds, and just remember that you don't need to give people your shed spots, but it's always good to share with them tips. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching Bows, Bros, and Bucks. Have a great rest of your day.